Welcome back to Madman Review. Ever thought about what happens after a self-defense shooting? It's not just about the law and staying safe. There's a sneaky little trick that could keep your wallet safe too. It's something that's rarely talked about. But in this video, we're going to spill the beans on this well-kept secret. So get ready because you're about to discover a surprising twist in the aftermath of self-defense scenarios that most people never even think about. Imagine you're in a self-defense situation and you've had to use your firearm. Now, in the heat of the moment, you very likely won't be thinking about medical bills or cops. But here's a little secret that could save you a ton of hassle and money. If you find yourself in police custody and you end up at the hospital, guess who might just be on the hook for your medical expenses? That's right. Those bills might not even make it to your mailbox. So if you're ever in that tough spot where you've had to defend yourself, it's pretty smart to ask the cops to take you straight to the hospital, even if you're feeling fine. Now I know what you're thinking. Why go to the hospital if you're not hurt, right? But here's the kicker. When you're in that hospital bed, there's a pretty good chance you won't have any officers hanging around. It's like a little breather from all that intensity. And here's where it gets interesting. This tip, for some reason, stirs up a lot of debates. Some folks agree, some don't. But today, I'm going to break it all down for you, plain and simple. Why should you always, and I do mean always, request a hospital trip for a self-defense shooting? Stick around because we're about to unpack this controversial topic and see what all the fuss is about. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Public and law enforcement perspectives. Diving into the world of self-defense shootings, there's this fascinating angle about how the public and law enforcement view things differently. Let's start with the public perspective. For most folks, the idea of going to the hospital after a self-defense shooting, especially if you're not bleeding or bruised, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I mean, why do it if you're walking and talking just fine, right? Here's the twist. This move is not just about checking for hidden injuries, it's also a strategic play in the whole legal aftermath. For the average Joe, this isn't something that immediately clicks because we don't usually mix medical decisions with legal strategies. Now, flip the script to the law enforcement side. These guys have a whole different take on things. Cops, especially investigators, would much prefer you didn't head straight to the hospital. Why? Simple. They want to get the lowdown on what happened ASAP. Time is of the essence in these scenarios, and having you in the hospital can slow things down, complicate things, or even potentially limit their immediate access to you. Now, the police might not be too keen on you knowing this hospital strategy. Why? Because it could throw a wrench in their investigative process. They're working on gathering evidence, piecing together the story, and figuring out if the shooting was justified. If you're chilling in a hospital bed, that process gets a little more complicated. Physical and psychological effects. Let's dive into the physical and psychological effects of being involved in a self-defense shooting. It's a topic that doesn't get nearly enough airtime, but it's super important to understand, especially if you ever find yourself in such an intense situation. First off, let's talk adrenaline. In any high-stress scenario, especially one as intense as a self-defense shooting, your body's natural response is to pump adrenaline like crazy. It's like your body's own action movie soundtrack, boosting your alertness and response time. Here's the thing. When your adrenaline is going through the roof, you might not even realize you're injured. You could be walking around with injuries and not even feel a thing because your body is in overdrive mode. Now let's forget about the heart. We're not just talking emotions here, we're talking about your literal beating heart. After a self-defense shooting, your heart rate and blood pressure can skyrocket. It's like running a marathon without moving an inch. This isn't just a short-term spike either. We're talking hours of your heart and blood pressure being in the red zone. Imagine the strain that puts on your body, especially if you're not in the best shape or have a heart condition. That's why medical checkups after such incidences are important. You could be a ticking time bomb for a heart attack and not even know it. And let's not skip over the psychological impact. Going through a self-defense shooting is not something you just shrug off. It's a massive, traumatic event. Your mind might be racing, replaying the scenario, filled with what ifs and should haves. It's a lot to process, and it's not something you should do alone or in a stressful environment like a police station. A hospital offers a more stable, calmer setting where you can start to process everything that's happened. So when we boil it down, the physical and psychological effects of a self-defense shooting are no joke. They're intense, long-lasting, and need immediate attention. It's not just about dealing with the here and now. It's also taking care of your future self, body, and mind. Legal and medical implications. All right, let's chat about the legal and medical implications that come into play after a self-defense shooting. This stuff is way more complex than most people think, and it's totally worthy of getting into. First up, the legal side of things. When you're involved in a self-defense shooting, the legal roller coaster is just getting started. If you find yourself in such a situation, one of your first moves should be to ask to be taken to the hospital. Again, you might be thinking, why the hell go to the hospital if I'm not even hurt? Well, here's the thing. It can actually be a smart legal strategy. See, when you're at the hospital, you're kind of in this gray area when it comes to police custody. In many places, if the cops take you to the hospital while you're in their custody, guess you might get stuck with a medical bill. Not you, but the county or jurisdiction. That's a pretty big deal, especially considering how crazy expensive medical care can be. There's more. If you're in the hospital, there's a chance you might not even see a cop while you're there. Some jurisdictions avoid taking official custody to dodge those medical bills. So if the investigation shows everything was above board and you were just defending yourself, you might walk out without even having a police escort. That's some real food for thought. Now let's talk medical. After a self-defense shooting, your body is going through a lot. You might think you're totally fine, but the stress and adrenaline can mask injuries or other health issues. This is serious business. Your adrenaline is sky high. Your heart racing like you've just sprinted a marathon. You might not even feel injuries you've sustained. That's why getting checked out at a hospital is a no-brainer. Plus, if you're older or not in the best shape, the stress from the incident could literally kill you. Being at the hospital already could be a lifesaver in more ways than one. So the bottom line here is pretty clear. The legal and medical implications after a self-defense shooting are huge. Getting to a hospital not only takes care of your health, but also puts you in a better spot legally. It's a win-win that's definitely worth considering. Legal representation and police custody. Let's talk about legal representation and police custody after a self-defense shooting. This stuff can get pretty intense, and it's super important to have your ducks in a row. First off, if you're involved in a self-defense shooting, having legal self-defense protection means you've got an attorney who's got your back from the get-go. They show up, handle the talking with the cops, and basically steer the ship for you. This is crucial because, let's be real, most of us aren't exactly legal experts, especially under pressure. Now, if you're flying solo without legal protection, here's a smart move. Tell the police just enough, like what made you fear for your life and that you acted in self-defense. And then you hit them with, I don't want to talk more without my attorney. That's your golden ticket to keeping things tight until you get legal advice. But again, the curveball. Ask to be taken to the hospital, even if you're not visibly hurt. It adds this layer of complexity to your police custody status. In a lot of cities and states, if you're in police custody and get taken to the hospital, the jurisdiction might end up footing your medical bill. As I mentioned earlier, that's a big deal because it could influence whether or not the cops officially take you into custody right then and there. The reality is, if you're at the hospital under police watch, things are still in flux. If the investigation shows you did nothing wrong, you could be out there without any further police hassle. But if things look sketchy or if it's not clear-cut case of self-defense, you could end up in cuffs. What's key here is understanding how these pieces fit together. Having a lawyer from the start can make a world of difference in navigating these tricky waters. And knowing the ins and outs of how police custody can play out, especially with the hospital angle, can seriously impact how things go down after a self-defense shooting. It's a lot to think about, but hey, knowledge is power, right? Summing things up. The idea of heading to the hospital after a self-defense shooting, as several law enforcement veterans online lay out, might raise some eyebrows, but when you really think about it, it makes a ton of sense. If you've just been involved in a self-defense shooting, you know how it's intense. Adrenaline's pumping, the situation just plain chaotic. Your first instinct might not be to head to the hospital, especially if you're walking away without a scratch, but that's exactly what we're suggesting, and let's summarize the reasons. First up, the adrenaline factor. When you're in a high-stress situation like a self-defense shooting, your body's adrenaline levels go through the roof. This isn't just a little spike, we're talking about a full-blown adrenaline rush. And here's the thing about adrenaline. It can mask pain and injuries. You might think you're totally fine, but your body's in overdrive, hiding the fact that you could be bleeding somewhere. Then there's the whole health checkup aspect. The stress from the situation can do a number on your body. Your heart rate and blood pressure can skyrocket, and for folks who aren't exactly in peak physical condition, this could spell serious trouble. You could be a heart attack waiting to happen and not even know it. Getting checked out at the hospital is a smart move to ensure you're actually okay. Lastly, in many jurisdictions, if you're taken to the hospital while in police custody, the county or jurisdiction might get stuck with your medical bill. It's a pretty big deal considering how expensive medical care can be. Plus, there's a chance that you might not even see a cop at the hospital, depending on how things play out with the investigation and custody issues. So don't forget that after a self-defense shooting, you're in the custody of the police. It's in your best interest to head to the hospital. Not only does it help you check for injuries, it's also a savvy move legally and financially. And that wraps up this video. If you found it helpful or entertaining, please help the channel grow by clicking on the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And tap that notification bell too while you're at it. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.